Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Hi there, and thank you so much for joining me today as we launch into all things microbiome. This is honestly one of my favorite topics because as we continue to discover more and more each day, the microbiome plays such a pivotal role in all aspects of our dog's health and our own health too. You're really in for a treat though, because today my guest is Dr. Carol Hughes, who is arguably one of the world's preeminent experts when it comes to the canine microbiome. Carol has had a vast career in bioscience research and development, and for over 10 years has specifically been engaged in research and development of our companion animals' microbiomes with her company PetBiome. In today's conversation, Carol and I explore the microbiome as the missing key in the canine diet and how nurturing this ecosystem, you can vastly improve your dog's physical, mental, and emotional health. And based on the wonderful questions that you guys ask me, Carol and I touch on a range of topics that I know you're going to find really interesting and really helpful, including what the microbiome actually is and its role in health, the pros and cons of probiotics, the relationship between the microbiome and behavioral challenges like anxiety and aggression, how dogs' microbiomes have changed in the post-COVID era, easy steps you can take to better support your dog's microbiome and increase microbiome diversity, and whether a raw or gently cooked diet is better for microbiome health, as well as what fecal matter transfer, or FMT, is and how your dog might benefit from it. We cover this and so much more. I know you're going to take so much away from this conversation. But before we dive in, just a quick note that this episode is sponsored by Aspirationary, which in full transparency is another project of mine where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to support you in becoming all you aspire to be. I'm really excited to announce that we have released a Spanish language version of our popular My First Period tracker for young girls and tweens in order to increase menstrual literacy and empower young women to become advocates for their menstrual health. You can learn more about our books on Instagram at Aspirationary, and that's spelled Aspirationery. Okay, on that note, let's go. Hi, Carol. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a
Oh,
pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. You've been on the top of my list of people I've wanted to talk to for ages, and I'm so thrilled we were able to do this because you are, in my opinion, like the expert when it comes to canine microbiome. You know so much. You are just such a wealth of knowledge, and I think what you're going to share with us today will really be helpful for pet parents to kind of put into context how they work with the microbiome in their dog in order to support health, and actually how doing that for your dog allows you to reflect on how to support your own microbiome as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of really good stuff that comes out of this.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, we have obviously we've been researching since 2014. Um, and I think the data, when you see the amount of data that's produced by a microbiome test, it is overwhelming. But the microbiome is actually quite logical, which I really love. It does operate in a particular way, and it does have kind of rules and ways of managing itself that are just fascinating, really. And I think if you can get hold of that, um, you can run with it and you can make real changes. And I think it is the missing kind of key, really, for diet, especially at the moment when we're in a kind of crucial point for the microbiome in dogs, for sure. I think they are very sensitized, and they're in a poor state. Their microbiomes are in a poor state, for sure. I'm sure humans are very similar, and dogs and humans seem to share. They very closely share their microbes. So, yeah, if we can help the dog, we can hopefully help the human to go with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things I'm looking forward to doing today in our conversation is to demystify the microbiome a little bit and how we actually support it. Because you and I were chatting before we started recording, and I was saying that I think that we have this tendency, particularly in the West, to hear a bit about the microbiome and we know we need to support it. But then we're just throwing anything and everything at it that we've heard about to try to
Yeah,
fix a problem in our dogs. And I totally understand wanting to support our dogs and wanting to alleviate any issues that they have. But I think that actually kind of cutting it back and coming back to basics with what is the microbiome and what is it actually doing? What is the role that it's playing within our dogs? And kind of start
yeah,
at a bit of a foundation would be helpful
yeah,
to then support us in thinking about how do we then go about supporting it kind of more generally. So would you mind giving a little bit of a
yeah.
rundown of what the microbiome is and what it's doing in the body?
Yeah, well, I think the microbiome is the most complex, but the most balanced environment that I've probably studied, in my long kind of life in science. And I think that's why I love it so much. It is, you can get inside it and you can change it. And its job is to keep the dog or you, or to keep you alive, because they are inside. You are the host, or the dog is the host, and it's the microbe's job to keep you healthy and thriving and not dying, just to keep you alive, so the microbes can stay alive and they can perpetuate. So they've got a vested interest in managing your health in a particular way that's really quite interesting. But the trouble is, for the microbes, they don't like to be interfered with. They're really sensitive to environmental pressures and changes. And I think the first thing to do is to stand back and actually look at the microbes as an ecosystem. Whatever ecosystem comes to mind, for me, it's always the Great Barrier Reef. I know we talked about that before, or a garden. I love gardening. So the garden to me is an ecosystem. The Great Barrier Reef is an ecosystem, and you have changes, fluxes and changes within that system that are ongoing. You may get, today I might get more white flowers, or if it's the Great Barrier Reef, today there may be more red fish or more blue fish. But as part of the process of that evolution of the garden or the Great Barrier Reef, they will change, but it will stay stable, if you see what I mean. So you're getting changes, fluxes, but underneath there is a stability. So first of all, with the microbiome, it's understanding the stability. Is that microbiome stable? And for that, you need to have a core set of bacteria that are present, and you need lots of transient bacteria that go through. So they may come in from the garden, the earth in the dog. So we're talking now about the gut microbiome. There may be bacteria that come in and then go out. They do a job on the way, and they pass out. But that might take up a third of the microbiome. Then you need bacteria that digest food. So meat, kibble, carbohydrates, they need to be in there. You need to have a certain amount of bacteria that produce vitamins. And then you need the bad boys, the proteobacteria, some pathogens in there that produce chemicals to stimulate the immune function. So everyone is doing a job, and they may go up and down while they do the job, but there will be a core stability. So if you've got a microbiome with no bad boys, no pathogens, because you've been to the vet and he's wiped them all out with antibiotics, you haven't got anything stimulating the immune system, and you've evicted them from their micro niche, which they may have been there from them, they may have been passed on by the mother, and you've turned them out of the microbiome, and then you've got a poor immune function from then on in. So it's how you get those back. Who are they? What have you lost, and how do you get them back? And the microbiome is very forgiving, I guess. As long as you know that you've lost them and you know where to find more, they will come back and you will restore that balance that's so important. But it's almost getting away from looking at it as a separate deal. You've kind of really got to get immersed in it and really understand why you need all those different types of bacteria. You don't really need to know their names, but you need to kind of get involved in a different way, really.
Oh, definitely, definitely. No, I think that's helpful. And
Yeah,
I think it's helpful that you mentioned that we actually need some quote unquote bad bacteria as
Yeah,
well, because I think that we're in a society that is very antimicrobial. We've been conditioned to get rid of everything. And I think, this audience is probably more familiar with it, but I think it's worth repeating that things like antibiotics that aren't targeted, they don't just wipe out the
yeah,
bad things that you're trying to get rid of, they wipe out everything. And then
yeah,
where do you start for kind of replenishing that, particularly when we might not know what all of the different microbes do, but
no,
they serve a function. And what's kind of happening not only within the individual dog when we wipe that out, but we hear more and more about the problems with antibiotic resistance, for example, that
yeah.
this then spreads to the wider population too. Um, when we're adding those sort of disruptions to the microbiome.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the dogs we see, you will the first dose of antibiotics will go through, and if the dog's diversity is fairly low to start with, say it's around 2, and since we had the COVID lockdowns and we got rid of lots of microbes during then, that the diversity score has dropped for sure. So some dogs, if they got a diversity score of 2.7 and above, they'll recover from that first kind of dose. They will lose quite a lot of bacteria, but the bacteria kind of hang on at really low levels. They're determined not to be evicted because they know their life depends on it. So they hang on at 0.001%. They're clinging on for dear life. But it's the second lot that wipes them out. And if the dog or the cat, even, because it's the same with cats, once you've got a diversity score of below 0.5, you may have one species of bacteria that takes up 90% of the microbiome. That's how bad it is. So it could be lactobacillus. Lactobacillus makes lactic acid, and that might be the only species in there. Well, there's no way the food is going to get digested at all, which is when they turn you over to a hypoallergenic diet, because that doesn't need much digesting. And you haven't got any microbes to digest it, but it doesn't do anything about repopulating the microbiome. And we get some dogs that live on antibiotics because they can't come off them. There isn't any way of digesting the food. And then after that, then really you just need to go to a fecal matter transplant because somehow you've got to repopulate the gut with good bacteria. And what's worse sometimes is the probiotics. When people go for a probiotic, the probiotic will have lactobacillus in it, and that's one of the bacteria that tends to overgrow following antibiotics. So you're putting back in more of what you're trying to get rid of, and then you're just then getting nowhere, which is quite horrible for people, really. And they get very stuck then when they get to that point, because whatever they do just doesn't seem to work.
Right, right. Well, I was mentioning to you before that my friend and colleague Stacy Renfrey of Hozo Hounds, she and I have been talking quite a
Mm,
lot about our individual cases that we've got. We support one another on some of our more complex cases, and one of the things that we've been noticing as this kind of trend within dogs too is exactly what you're talking about, and relating that to issues of malabsorption as well, where
mm,
the dog. I mean, some of the dogs that we've been seeing, you can pump as much food into the dog's body, and
yeah,
they're really low in terms of their weight where they should be. That when we do
yeah,
blood tests, they're showing low for BVITs and that kind of a thing. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more specifically about the role that the microbiome plays in how our dogs are actually breaking down food and then making
yeah,
use of that food. How are they getting the nutrients out of that? Because I think there's often a misconception when we think about digestion. We think it's just kind of the stomach breaking stuff down and then
yeah.
the food gets absorbed. But the microbes play such an important role in how your dog makes use of the food that you're giving them. Could you talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about that,
yeah.
please?
I mean, the microbes make chemicals, so they make secondary metabolites, it's called. So they might make short chain fatty acids, which are fine because they're absorbed as energy. And you will get bacteria in the dog that can either digest carbohydrates or meat, and hopefully they'll have both sets. but some dogs don't, because we talked earlier how it's getting polarized. So that's a problem to start with malabsorption, is that if you don't have the two sets in the microbiome, the ones that digest carbs, the ones that digest meat, you're already kind of struggling a little bit. But there will be different species. They'll do a more I suppose, a specific role. So they make B vitamins, or they'll make minerals more bioavailable to the dog, but you've got to have them in there to start with. So you've got to have the diversity within the meat eating bacteria and the carb eating bacteria. You've still got to have great diversity within those to produce the different metabolites that contribute to health and the diet. And we are noticing that we're losing them. We're losing them specifically. One of the strongest batch of bacteria we're losing a bacteria that digests bloody meat. So I suppose raw, but mucin, they're called mucin digesters, and they're really strong kind of health promoting bacteria. And we're noticing that's the ones that are probably under threat at the moment. And as they are reduced, the microbiome is taken over by carbohydrate digesting bacteria related to anxiety, because there is a complex relationship. You remember we talked about the microbiome is so balanced. If you lose one gang, another gang will take over. That's the law of the jungle, or the law of the microbiome. If one is reduced, another one will grow. And you've just got to hope that the one that grows isn't aggressive or doesn't promote ill health in the dog. And that's always the struggle with a diet and trying to balance a diet. You've got to consider the microbes as well, because you're trying to feed them to balance each other out and not lose some from the microbiome. I think that when dogs went out and found food, because we do a lot of not stray, street dogs, I think, and they have the most wonderful microbiomes because they eat anything and they eat any rubbish. And they've got micro niches, possibly going back for hundreds of years. So they've got all sorts of bacteriocins. They make their own antibiotics. They have all these pathogens that prime the immune system. I mean, we've even found bubonic plague present at very, very 0.01%. But I'm quite up for that, because really what it's doing is adding strength to the core. So I love those dogs, but they struggle then when you rehome them, because whoever gets them wants to feed them our way, and it doesn't go. And they want to go out and trash everything and eat everything, eat anything. And their body, their microbes, are telling them what to eat. So I think sometimes we have to actually say, well, what does my dog want to eat? And when we're talking to people specifically about fermented food, we say, don't mix it in with the food. Just ask them if they want to eat it. Because if they don't want to eat it, it's not right for their microbes. So find them something they want to eat. And that's quite a good kind of game to play, I guess, when you're trying to repopulate the microbiome. What does the dog want to eat?
Oh, that's so helpful. And I love that so much for a number of reasons. And one, when we're talking about rescue dogs, and
Yeah,
I've spent quite a bit of time in Mexico, and I've seen there are a lot of charities here, for example, that take street dogs and then they ship them up to the US or to
yeah,
Canada. And I've seen with working with some case studies as well that there's actually huge issues that come as a result of
yeah,
that on the health front, because you have not
yeah.
only changed the environment, the climate, all of that, and the dog's gone through a stressful situation, but exactly like you're saying, they are then eating in a way that is completely not only unfamiliar to them as individuals, but because so many of these street dogs come from generations of street dogs, they've
They're
built,
encoded.
they're
Yeah,
totally encoded for it, and then they don't have a
yeah,
way of because we essentially have them captive, they don't have a way of finding what it is that they need for themselves. But to your point too of self-selection, I think that that's a
yeah,
practice that is so important for us as dog owners to actually really to take on board, and to
yeah,
remove some of our fear around, oh my God, but if my dog doesn't eat something, something's going to happen to it. That
yeah,
actually they have an innate knowing, more so they're
yeah.
more connected than we are to this,
Yes,
but they have an
yes,
innate knowing of what it is that they need and allow them. We can learn from them by
Yeah,
putting things on offer. And I often suggest getting like a platter, for example, and separating things out and allow
yeah,
the dog to show you what it is that they need in order to, because they know how to repopulate themselves. I think that's a really
yeah,
helpful tip.
yeah. And I think with my dogs, I take them gardening. They come gardening and eat things in the garden. They really enjoy that, and they'll eat plants. And I think that's brilliant. And we've also got land, so we walk on the land, and they will eat bits of soil at different stages around. It won't always be the same place, but they are absolutely manic for a portion of soil. And you know why they're doing it. But I do get it. Some people would say, well, they can't be doing that. There must be something wrong. Well, it's not. It's this sense from the microbes are saying, we need to stay alive. We need you to go out because you've got the gut brain axis. Go and find that food. And dogs love, out of everything we look at, dogs and horses, actually, they're great foragers. So they love to go out and find something they need. And I think when you're walking, if you're walking through trees too, that's a great place to top up the microbiome. A kind of walk in the woods in autumn. I'm not sure what you get in Mexico, but autumn foraging through leaves and moldy things is top. It's really, really good for them. Really good for them.
Right, right. And those are the things that we try to discourage them from because we're afraid of them getting sick. But
Yeah.
those are the things that are keeping them healthy.
I think if they get sick from eating something that they've found, I don't even mind that too much because it may be that they've got an overgrowth of a bacteria that needs to go. So it's a sort of two-way system. It's either that you haven't got enough microbes in there, which it isn't good. So you probably need to know that you've got diversity, you've got a good diversity score. Because if it's low at 0.5, we've just done a dog today that's zero point 0.5, he can't digest anything. So yeah, you have to be careful with that. But as long as the diversity score is high enough, there's no way they're going to get sick. No way. I don't really get my head around that thought process because a dog is such a scavenger. Really at heart, he loves to do that. That snuffling for stuff, doesn't he? I mean,
Right.
it's really in his nature.
Well, it's in his
I suppose that's why he's
DNA.
got a good nose. He's got a good
Yeah.
nose for it, hasn't he?
Well, 100%. And I think that's where it's helpful to remind ourselves too of how dogs evolved, where they came
Mm,
from. They came from eating our scraps. So,
yeah,
and kind of foraging around us and where we were hunting and all of that. So it's very much inbuilt with them. But I think that I've had several conversations with guests like Kim Brophy, for example, on the podcast, where we talk about actually needing to get back in touch with
yeah,
where our dogs come from and what's encoded in them genetically, what kinds of environments were they raised for, and the kinds
yeah,
of jobs that they were raised for, because we deprive them of that, all of that, and we keep them kind of captive. And we often do it in this almost like helicopter parent kind of sense too. Like we want to keep them safe, but in many
yeah,
respects, that's actually making them unsafe by not allowing them to
yeah,
explore those things on many levels.
yeah. No, I think getting your head around the fact that dogs need to eat dirt. I mean, I had some students come up. I was at a behavior conference. It was a really good one. We had lots of students. A lot of them were RSPCA. They were wonderful. Sort of really, really interested. And so I sent them all the reports and they read them overnight and they came back. I think the students came back the next day and said, well, what could you summarize what dogs need to eat? I said, yeah, shit and soil, excuse my language. I just couldn't, it just came out really quick. And they kind of looked at me sort of double and they went, oh yeah, you're right, they do. Because horse poo is great. They eat anybody's. I mean, if they're eating poo, they're trying to repopulate the microbiome. So as we know with fecal matter transplants, we're into that big time, and there's nothing better for a dog. Sorry, I don't know how you're going to tell people that one.
Well, it's true. It's so true. I was going to save it for a little bit later, but actually, let's jump onto fecal matter transplants if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
exactly is that? How does that benefit a dog? And when might that be something that a pet parent wants to consider for their dog?
yeah. I think. We do it. There's two different ways of looking at it. If you're a vet, you're going to make it overcomplicated. And I get why they have to do that, because safety has to be built in. So we're developing a vet product, which will be a liquid kind of mix that they do in a different way. They don't do it orally. I'm not sure what they do with it, but whatever they do with it, enema, I presume,
Yeah.
they'll do it differently, and they'll sedate the dog, and it'll cost a lot of money, I presume. So that's fine. Or you can take the oral tablets, which we talked about before, and you've got in America where it's dried, or you can freeze dry it. So we're doing it both methods, and give it as a dried product in food. And there has been some research to show that that's actually probably the best way of doing it. And I do get that, because dogs do eat poo. So, that's fine. But you just need to know that the donor dog, has a really stable microbiome. And there aren't many of those. I'm sad to say there aren't that many around. Your street dog would have a stable microbiome, but you'd need to know that the microbiome is stable, because you've got to freeze it or dry it, grind it, store it, and then get it back into the dog. But we have got now a kind of self-help group set up. I would say that probably 60-70% of dogs now that we see in our testing, when they're coming through the testing, do need a fecal matter transplant. That would be the quickest route to restore the microbiome. And because we're losing that mucin digesting bacteria, we're actually, by setting up the fecal matter transplant bank, we're preserving those microbes so we can put them back in the dog. Because if they go from the population, you're going to struggle to change the dog's diet anyway. They're going to struggle. They'll become polarized, and they'll only either eat carbs or meat, and you won't get them changing. They won't be able to digest both. I mean, when I talk to a lot of people, they're horrified if their dog eats a bone, or the dogs can't digest bones. So we're already moving away in a direction away from these microbes that do that. And that's when a fecal matter transplant would be a good idea. But more and more dogs, I think, going forward, would need one.
So would you advise, though, that somebody has a microbiome test first for their dog
Yeah.
before going down that route? Okay.
I think in our self-help group, we're going to sort of test it out, see how people get on. We have got some people in it. We haven't got, it's not a big group, but some people won't have had the test, and we're still going to do it. We're going to explain how to do it, why to do it, and we will always test the donor dog, because I think it is important to, just see what happens to all sorts of dogs, and not necessarily spend all the time testing, but actually do the practical process. I think we know enough about what's in the population, because we've got such a massive population database, and we've got 48 different types of dysbiosis. And what we want to do eventually is match a donor dog with a particular type of dysbiosis. For that, you would need to test both donor and recipient, but it's not always what you need to do. The most important thing is that if you've got a dog that isn't coping, is try and put him right. Go the quickest route.
Right.
But
right.
make sure the donor dog hasn't had antibiotics. That's the most important thing.
Right. So for those listeners that are not really familiar with what dysbiosis is and what that presents, could you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, dysbiosis is an imbalance in the gut bacteria. So if you go back to your Great Barrier Reef, if one year you had too many sharks that ate all the little fish, you wouldn't have much diversity in marine life. And hopefully it would restore itself, but it may not. It may need a bit of help. And I think for the environment, because the pollutants are massive, but the potential for pollutants and agrochemicals and antibiotics is so huge, you are likely going forward, you are going to have to help the microbiome to rebalance itself. So a dysbiosis is when a gang of bacteria overgrow. For some reason, the microbiome has become unfavorable for the good gut bacteria from environmental pollutants or stress, or passing microbes from the human that's not very well, or has, say, autism. So something gets into the microbiome, makes it unfavorable. one gang of bacteria overgrow and gradually they take over because they're the dominant type. And then your dog will either have itchiness, allergies, have an infection. It can be a range of symptoms to go with the dysbiosis, of which there are about 48 different types that we've logged and processed. So to be accurate, you could do with knowing what kind of dysbiosis it is. I mean, we had a lady with a street dog, and her dog had an overgrowth of bacteria that are in rats. Which was really unusual, but it was because she'd changed his diet. Usually you'd go out and find some bacteria that would kill off those bacteria, but I think the diet was too rich, so the microbes were just having a really good time and getting aggressive and growing and taking over. And that's it, really. It's just a balance. It's a little bit like a city that functions properly. You need a police force, hospitals, libraries, you need a town planning. It's the same thing. For a city to thrive, everything's got to be kind of in balance, and what people need to stay happy. The microbiome is exactly the same.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And I think something that you're saying within that too points to something that I'm a big proponent of as well, is that when we're thinking about feeding our dogs and what the ideal diet is, the quote unquote ideal diet, I really prioritize, and I think it's so important to feed the dog in front of you, to look at what's going on with the dog in front of you and customize to that, because there is no one right way. There's no one right way to treat anal gland issues. There's no one right way to treat other gut issues or what have you, because it's understanding what's at the root of that. But I think
agreed.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I think this points to a question that I get quite a lot from listeners and from clients as well, is when we talk about the microbiome, we're often told, we'll go ahead and add in some probiotics. And then you hear kind of counter stories about that too, that no, you're better off really tailoring the probiotics that you're going to be using to, like you're saying, to the particular dysbiosis. But if you don't know what's actually going on with your dog, how do you first start approaching dysbiosis in relation to both pre and probiotics? What's your kind of general guidance for that?
I definitely go with the prebiotics, because you're feeding what's in there. I'm much more a fan of feeding what's in there and what's encoded in there, because you will have, as I say, those bacteria hanging on by the fingernails, or the testing will pick up the encoding part of the microbiome. So there's a potential in there if you feed them. But you may have, sometimes we have dogs that have five species of bacteria, and and may have 700 in total. So 5 are doing a job and the rest are all encoded or not doing a job. So if you give a prebiotic, you will generally find a food to feed those bacteria, of which inulin is fabulous. You almost can't fail with inulin. It's really good, and dogs tend to like it. And bone broth is another one. I'm a massive fan of that. But with probiotics, first of all, I've really tried hard to track them. First of all, I'm not sure how they're labelled is accurate. When they say live bacteria, I'm not sure that it is. I think that needs a little bit of demystifying. I don't think the manufacturers are always genuine, let's say. I'm not sure how else to say it. So when you're putting the bacteria in, if it's live, we should pick it up on the test. So whatever those species are on that probiotic, we should pick them up. And we've never picked them up, never. So whatever, because they're different to what's in the dog anyway, we're not identifying them. Even the bifidobacteria species are different in most dogs. They're very low in dogs, but they wouldn't be what you would give them, because we're only licensed to give a certain amount of different species anyway. So you haven't got a massive variety that you can put in. Well, if you think you may have 30 different species of bifidobacteria in a dog, potentially encoded, and you put in the wrong one, which you can't give it because legislation says you can't give it, it's not going to work. That's the problem with them. I'm not anti them, because they may be doing a job that we don't really understand. So I'm not anti, but I think to be accurate, you're better off with the prebiotic because it will always feed what you've got in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I would agree. I think my stance on probiotics, I do recommend probiotics for
Yeah,
clients, but using products that have canine specific probiotics as a start. So not
yeah,
you're just kind of one or two general sort of probiotics, but where you do get more species and you're getting the canine specific ones and soil based ones because too,
yeah. No, love soil based.
yeah,
Can't go wrong with the soil based. Yeah,
exactly, exactly. And
yeah,
but it speaks to your point too that dogs are outside eating dirt, right? And so
yeah,
if you are in a situation where that you're not, maybe you're living in an apartment in the city, for example, and your dog doesn't really have access to the soil,
yeah.
adding in the soil-based ones can actually be really beneficial for them. But again, to your point,
Massive.
being more specific and prioritizing prebiotics.
Yeah, 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 definitely. We do use inulin a lot. Yeah, seems
Yeah.
to really suit dogs very well.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
and
I
bone
found.
broth.
Oh God, yeah. Bone broth's like a go-to. That is just,
Yeah,
it's so important for so many different dogs.
yeah.
Absolutely. So what is it specifically in bone broth that you find is supportive of the microbiome?
Well, it contains bifidobacteria anyway, so you're feeding the bifidobacteria, and it contains amino acids, 25% amino acids, and good gut bacteria love amino acids. So it's kind of a no-brainer, really. It's full of, I mean, it's just the best food for that, isn't it?
Mm.
So yeah, bone broth all the way, really. And dogs love it, don't they?
They do, they do. And I particularly find too that dogs that are suffering from GI stuff really benefit from it because one, you've got the glutamine as an amino acid in
Yeah,
there, which is really soothing. But it's also it's one of those things that smells really nice to them. And it's so if you've got a dog that's sort of struggling with inappetence, that can often encourage them to eat.
yeah,
So it's really great because I know as well from my experience of working with some clients with some really tough GI issues you can offer all of the really great things for their gut, but if they won't take it in because they don't feel
yeah,
well, then it's just kind of a moot point. So bone broth is like a
yeah,
go-to. No,
yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I wonder too, you touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about it. That oftentimes I get listeners who are writing in with questions around the relationship with the gut brain axis and
Mm,
specifically pet parents that have dogs who are reactive or might have
yeah,
anxiety, fear, that kind of a thing, and they're wondering how they can best support the behavioral side of their dog's life
yeah,
by supporting the gut. How would you recommend? Well, first of all, I guess, can you talk a little bit about that relationship and
yeah,
also what types of
yeah.
things can they be feeding to support those microbes that support
Um,
mental
I
health?
think that well, the it's very on trend at the moment. I think, isn't it, behaviour? I think with anxiety, for sure, it's when you have an overgrowth. You know, we talked about the bacteria that take over. If you've got an overgrowth of one species of bacteria because the microbiome has changed and it's become more favourable for that species, then all the bacteria that link to the gut brain axis tend to get reduced because they're only just tiny amounts. It may be 0.5%, but they're quite a bit like a town planner in a, you know, you've only got one town planner, but he's very important. So you don't need lots of them, but they are going to speak directly to the brain. And if it becomes unfavorable for those bacteria, they're lost or they become unencoded, they're decoded. So they're not working. And anxiety in particular is linked quite strongly to that. So the fact that you've lost those bacteria that make happy chemicals at the same time and talk to the gut brain. So it's worth checking out the biofilm, you know, what bacteria have taken over, how low are those good gut bacteria that prevent anxiety. That's really important. We do a lot with that. Aggression, to me, we do have a page on aggression, but I think it's more about discomfort with dogs. The ones that seem to be quite hard to manage are in discomfort more than, you know, they've probably got leaky gut, they've got poor sort of gut, the tight junctions are not getting mended, the bacteria that renew the tight junctions aren't there. So you get more associated with that. And then more recently, it's the Prevotella, because we can only go at the speed. If science writes a paper, we can suspect something, but very often when you're looking at what's in the microbiome, science won't even know what that bacteria does. So if suddenly you've got an overgrowth, at the moment, Prevotella is a big one. If you have an overgrowth of a species of Prevotella, you've got to work out, what does it manufacture? What does it link to? What does it speak to? Why is it there? And you're waiting on science to do some kind of paper so you can fit it in and give people really accurate and informative, tell them about what it's doing. And last year there was a paper came out on dogs that were highly motivated. I think it was Dogs That Work. And I think it was dogs that work for the army or do some kind of stressful, motivated, where they have to use their brain a lot. And Prevotella in every single one was high. And the more motivated they were, the higher Prevotella was. So that was a clue for us, because at least then we knew it was part of the gut atlas kind of link. And that's okay, I think, if you've got a highly motivated dog that's doing a job. But what happens if Prevotella, because the sort of downside of Prevotella is that it's antibiotic resistant, for one. So it may overgrow in dogs that aren't working, and it will also eat meat and eat carbs. So you kind of, once it starts to overgrow and grow out of control, you're left with this wild dog that doesn't know what to do with itself. So that's been accurate, absolutely 100% accurate. Any dog with a level of Prevotella over a certain amount will be a reactive, stressed kind of dog. And getting rid of Prevotella becomes the main goal then, which we can do.
So how would you do that then?
Kelp, there's kind of a biocide, an antimicrobial in kelp, which was it was very complicated. We were working on 4 different types of antimicrobials from food, and then another paper came out, which was very helpful, using kelp, and so we switched to that. But I think you have to be careful that the iodine levels, whoever you're buying it from, I think Healthful Pets is a good one. I know we talked about that earlier, because you don't want an overdose of iodine. And to be fair, you only need to reduce the Prevotella by maybe 10-20%, and the whole microbiome will kick back into action and reduce them naturally anyway. So you've only got to do a little bit. I think that's the beauty of the microbiome. It is doable as long as you know what to do. It's very targeted. You can make specific changes and it will change, and then you can leave it alone. Stand back and watch your garden grow, and that's what I love about the microbiome. I love that part. Once you've just adjusted it a bit, it will do its own thing. So you haven't got to worry about it forever. You haven't got to micromanage it.
I think that's really helpful, because we're often told as well that, if there's damage to the microbiome, which we see, and you've referenced this too with all of the hand sanitizers and everything that we were using during COVID, and how that has shifted the microbiome landscape dramatically as a result of that. So whether it's something like that, or it's something like the dog was born with a poor microbiome and then didn't get appropriate nutrition or what have you, that we're often told, and the fear is that it's kind of set, and it's an uphill battle from there, which there's a degree of truth to that. But from what I'm hearing you say too, is that we actually can do a lot of things to really to support our dogs and build it back up.
Yeah, you can. I mean, I think the worst dogs are when they're put on the hyperallergenic diet, and visually you could see what it does, but the microbes, you just, you've got nothing in there that's digesting anything. So that's the hardest to shift away from. But generally, as long as you know what's in there, you can do something about it. I think that's the fascinating bit, because you actually have the real-time information in front of you, and as long as you love your microbes, you're fine.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And don't get put off by the long names, because they have very strange names, don't they?
They do. They do. Well, I think that's also part of why it can feel overwhelming to people.
Yeah,
It feels really foreign and like something they can't wrap their head around. But when you put it in the language of like the Great Barrier Reef or a garden or what have you, that makes it much more approachable and
yeah,
understandable. And that there's this sense, I think, too, we were talking about developing a different relationship with it. There's a tending to it then. It becomes
yes,
like a nurturing of it versus
yes.
a kind of controlling it.
Yeah, yeah. Because they know what they want to do, they know what they need to do, but your worst enemy is the environment and what's on the outside and how you kind of step back and look at what the effect of that is. I mean, we're kind of lucky because we've got our own water, so it just comes down and filters through Snowdon. So it's filtered through granite, and the water is beautiful. So when you go somewhere that isn't like that, you can smell the water. And not so much dogs, but horses are really affected by that. So even that's interesting, isn't it? That it
Mm.
could be something you can't control, but is there in the environment and will make a difference. And it's just being alert to that and managing it in a way that you can bring back some kind of natural process to it, holistic. Um, and the microbiome, it is the thing that keeps you alive, so that's the important thing.
Yeah.
We've had some, it's quite sad, we've had some dogs that have come in that have died in between having their tests done. They've been really quite sick. And we've done the test, but the microbes are frantically trying to keep the dog alive. They're making steroids, they're making stimulants, they are trying their hardest. And I sort of think it's what it comes home really all the time, that if we could just keep the microbiome healthy, when it needed to keep the host alive, it could kick in quite quickly. And I do wonder, I think the dogs that we've done have had cancer, that once they lose the diversity and they lose the strength and the ability to keep the host alive, that must actually be an important part of disease. We've seen that in real time, that it has a job to do and it's ready to do it, but you do need to look after it. If you've got only 3 species doing a job, there's nothing to help keep the host alive either.
Mm.
So it does hit home how important it is at that point. It's the same in horses.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So if you were to kind of advise the average pet parent, what are the top tips that they can be doing themselves right now to help maintain diversity in the gut microbiome?
Yeah, I feed a wide range of foods, but trust your dog to tell you what he wants to eat. I mean, I love that part of my life with my dogs. I love to find out what they want to do. It usually involves the outside. Feed them, obviously, food that hasn't been treated by antibiotics. I tend to go for game, and we've got some really kind of really good local farmers that make their own meat. So we're sort of lucky, but I know people aren't often that lucky. But feed something of really high quality, and don't feed processed food. Same as the human, really, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And trust things like herbs to do a healing job to the microbes first, because herbs will impact the microbiome before they're passed on into the system. So if you've got a real imbalance in the gut, the polyphenols that come out of the herbs will do a job in the gut first. So it maybe they never go across the gut wall because they've had a big job to do in the gut. So that's interesting. I think that's a really interesting part of microbial health. The basics, really, isn't it? When you think about it, it's very basic,
Mm,
sort of
yeah.
common sense.
No,
It's not about complicated probiotics, or it's common sense, really, isn't it?
it isn't. And we were speaking before we started recording that my experience with both listeners commenting as well as clients that I've been working with, that you end up with a supplement graveyard in many respects because
Yeah,
you're just throwing anything and everything at the dog. And so often it is about kind of cutting back and going to basics. And I wondered if your sort of thoughts on this, because going back to what we were just saying about self-selection, something that I have found both fun, and this is also an enriching thing for your dog too. So it becomes a fun activity that you can do with them, but where you can offer like a variety of different herbs, for example, and just see,
Yeah,
dog safe herbs and just see what they're naturally drawn to. Are there
yeah.
any that you would recommend that sort of are your
Cleavers.
top ones? Cleavers. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
definitely cleavers. I think and scooch grass. I don't know what its proper name is, but I know the roots. Yeah, the roots are just fantastic. They're full of inulin. So I guess the dog knows, doesn't it, really?
Mm.
When I'm sort of doing my gardening, the dogs will take it out of the wheelbarrow. So yeah, no, it's very, very good for them. And it saddens me when you read about, oh, dogs eating grass, they've got a problem. Dogs eating grass are repopulating the gut for sure and trying to get those prebiotics into the gut to sort it out. It's really odd to me that food they've found to eat, that something a dog would eat would be bad for them is really an odd concept. I think that some dogs may be greedy and eat too much and then get ill. I don't really know why they would do that. I think that's a dog's mentality. But you do have to step in maybe sometimes. But generally, I think it's really interesting what they eat is really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it often comes from our sanitized
Yeah,
relationship with the world, that we're afraid, like, oh, that's dirty, don't eat that, or what have you. And the fact that we've become so far removed from our own food system, as well
yeah.
as the dogs. And when you start to look, I think this was something that was really eye-opening for me when you look at the history of kibble, for example. Where did that
Oh,
actually come from? Like, that was never devised with the intention of it being an optimal food for your dog's health. That's not the
no,
origins of it at all.
no.
But we've been sold this sort of pasteurized version of food
Yeah,
for our dogs. And I think it's really had an impact on the psyche, so that when we then switch to something like fresh food, we become really worried, like, oh, can the dog handle a bone? Dogs aren't supposed to eat bones, or they're not supposed to eat
yeah,
this, not supposed to eat that. And I think so much of what it's offering us is a shift in our own mentality. The
yeah,
dogs already know what they need and want, and it's up to us to
yeah,
just be open to that, to let them lead, and then offer them a variety of things. Since we do have them captive, they can't just, walk out and get what they want. We have to
yeah,
provide it. But just
yeah,
try a bunch of different things and see how they do.
yeah. Oh, and the other thing my dogs like, and we because the other part of the business is we analyze plants. That's our we find out the chemicals in plants and what because we do antibiotic research, but from plants. So that's been quite useful, really. But my dogs love cauliflower leaves, and they actually take them out of the vegetable and they hold them tight, and the look on their face when they're eating them, and you kind of think, well, who would have thought that, really? And I mean, I wouldn't eat a cauliflower leaf. I do love cauliflower, I do love raw, but why would they do that? But it's full of polyphenols. It's absolutely full of things that will do them good, but won't leave the gut. It won't go over the gut wall barrier. It just stays in the gut doing a job,
Hmm.
which is fascinating to me.
Well, it's funny you should mention that with cauliflower leaves. My dog Lucky
Yeah,
loves cauliflower, absolutely
yeah,
loves it. And I will offer him the leaves, and he likes that too. But last night he had some broccoli in his
yeah.
meal, and he picked it out. He didn't want, but rather than
Oh,
looking
yeah.
at like, oh, there's something wrong, he just didn't need it last night.
No, I think because cauliflower contains an antimicrobial called apigenin, and it's when you've got an overgrowth of a good gut bacteria, the apigenin kicks in to reduce it. So it's like a balancing thing. But if you haven't got very many of them, you don't want to kill them off. He won't want the broccoli because it'll be killing them off, which is why I quite like, as you say, cooking separate foods and offering because they won't eat it. And the dog is sensitive above any other animal that we do. It is so sensitive to food and change. It's really worth finding out what your dog wants to eat for sure.
Definitely. And I'm wondering, from a microbiome perspective, do you see much of a difference between raw and gently cooked diets in terms of how they impact the microbiome?
Uh, Not massively, no. I think I know I don't actually. I think that with raw, you tend to get an overgrowth. If you're going to get an overgrowth, it will be fusobacteria. And I like raw food, and I particularly like the bacteria that go with the mucin digesters, the blood digesters, because we don't want to lose those. But I think a wholesome cooked diet is as good for sure. I know that people would disagree, and I don't disagree. I could be wrong, but just where we are in space and time with the microbiome as it is, I think a gently cooked diet, sure, if you're going to kind of blast everything out of it and overcook it, then that's not good. But if you think of bone broth, that's cooked, and that's one of the best, the best things. Because I quite like the fact that when you're cooking stuff, you're getting the chemicals out of the plants and the food that you're preparing. So I quite like that. But
yeah, definitely.
I
No,
think
'cause
it's where we're at the moment with the microbiome. I mean, maybe, if you've gone back before COVID, when we used to have pathogens in there, we used to have true pathogens. So 10% of the microbiome would be true pathogens that always cause disease. Well, that's horrifying, I guess, isn't it? That's your Campylobacter, bubonic plague, Helicobacter, E. coli, all of that gang that somebody go, oh dear, we don't want that in there. Well, you do really, and it's there doing a job. And one of the jobs it does, as well as stimulate the part of the microbiome that's related to the immune function, it helps digest bones and gristle. So they're really rapid digesters of things. And through the COVID, they've gone. I mean, you're lucky now to see a dog with 0.5% in the microbiome from 10%. And if you do get proteobacteria at 9% or 10%, most of it is Sutterella, which is an antibiotic resistant bacteria that's come out of animals that have been factory farmed, and it overgrows in factory farmed animals, and then it's passed on to the dog. So we then have to get rid of it because it isn't doing the dog. It's just taking up the microbiome and doing nothing with it, which isn't helpful, really.
Right. So when we're seeing massive changes across the entire population like that, how do we actually get balance back? Is that possible without FMT or?
We are entering a crucial time. I can't dress it up any better than that, where, again, think of the Great Barrier Reef. Look what it takes to look after that and prevent that from being polluted. Look how rainforests have been devastated. Look at the, here in the UK, there are some land in the UK that will never grow a crop again, or it will take 20 years to recover. And I would say actually that it will never grow a crop without the help of nitrogen, because you've totally got rid of the microbes. So we are entering a crucial kind of state now. It's nobody's fault at all. It's just where we are in the environment, because we're not taking it seriously enough. We're not grasping the nettle, and we need to do that. We need to take a clear picture. And I think that's because we've got the population data and we can see the changes and we can look into it at a greater level. We can see it changing and we can say, look, we need to be doing something. But everyone needs to get on board and just say, yes, we need to do something.
Yeah,
and not
absolutely.
just say it's about food, because it's not really about food. Some dogs won't tolerate even a good diet.
Oh, definitely. And we see that quite a bit as well. And pet parents that have tried everything and nothing's really worked. So all the stuff that they're coming saying, I'm doing everything right. Why isn't this working? But I think, before we started recording, you made a really good point that I want to bring back up for everybody to hear, is that it's not your fault. It's, that I think so often as pet parents, we can put the blame on ourselves. What could I have done better? What could I have done differently? But we're within this ecosystem that so many of these factors are out of our control. And so it's, what can you control in your environment?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think I suppose the top tip are get to know your plant antimicrobials, because they're the only thing that will work against bacteria that aren't antibiotics. So you're trying, if you've got one job to do, it's to reduce the antibiotic resistant bacteria that are living in the gut and have overgrown. And for that, plant antimicrobials, fecal matter transplants would help as well. And the mucin digesting bacteria at the moment are our three kind of weapons against what's happening.
Yeah, and I would add into that as well, thinking about things like alternatives to flea and tick
Yes.
sort of preventatives, and like what are the cleaners that you're using in your house, and that kind of a
Yeah.
thing, where you do have control and you can start to limit, but understanding there's a lot outside of our control as well, that it's not your fault. I think it's
Yeah.
important.
I think all of it just picks away at it, doesn't it? Just attacks it and alters the balance of it. And like I say, when you think of, I mean, we've restored our pasture to flower meadows, but there are some people. For us, it's fine because in Wales nobody's used sort of chemicals for 40 years, so it's kind of relatively easy and a joy to just allow it to come back. But some people on really farmed land, dairy pasture land, they can't get anything to grow. The seed banks have gone. Well, you're looking at the dog, you've got the encoded bacteria, and I can see them there. But if they go, it's going to be the same as over farmed land. They've gone, that's it. So it's crucial. I don't know where we're going. I can tell you the warning signs are there. And it's not people's fault if the dog can't tolerate a diet or has food allergies, food sensitivities. It's just the lay of the land. It's where we've got to, because we have warred on the microbiome. We have made war on the microbes.
Right.
And we need to kind of reverse that, really, and cherish them a bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also where you were talking about the transfer between us and our dogs, as we care for our own microbiome as well, we're caring for our dogs. Because one of the things I want to challenge is how, you see on Instagram these beautiful like raw bowls with the hashtag "my dog eats better than I do." And it's
Yeah.
like, but that's not okay. That's not a good thing either. You eat well as well.
Sorry,
That's
my
okay.
dog's barking. I'm just going to shut the door. I won't be a second. Hold on. Sorry,
Oh, that's okay.
I have terriers. They're just attacking someone. Sorry, yeah, you say, yeah.
No, so it's challenging that idea that we should be sacrificing in that way, where our dogs should eat better than we do. But in reality, when you care for yourself and you care for your own microbiome, that is inevitably going to affect your dog in a positive way as well.
Yeah, for sure. You're right. I'm not sure about those raw bowls. I don't think we're at a stage where that will make a massive difference, because if you haven't got the microbes in the microbiome to digest it, your dog won't get anything from it. So we are at a really odd place in, this is a unique time really for the microbiome. Gosh, I don't know what they're killing something down there.
It's okay. I have a Chihuahua Terrier mix. I'm very familiar with this. Oh, Carol, so if I want to point people to your research, and if they want to get a microbiome test, I know you do tests for people from all over the world. Is that correct? That they can ship
we can ship it to anywhere. Yeah.
Okay, so is the best way for them to find out more information on your website, biomeforpets.com? Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But if they get stuck, they can email, but we're slightly overwhelmed at the moment. There's been a massive interest, I think, in the vets are sort of coming on board now, which is fantastic, really. And we're doing some work with Caroline, so we're setting up a course for her, because I think to get more people comfortable with the microbiome, so that they can look into it and pass the information on, I think that's just going to be the best thing, really.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. And I think it's important. And as you said, as we're at this strange sort of junction, I think it's important for people to be aware and actually to challenge that cultural bias against microbes and quote unquote germs and all this sort of stuff, and actually look at how can we be supportive.
I have a lovely guy that's he's a clinical nutritionist, but a very strong veterinary clinical nutritionist. and he has all sorts of really odd ideas about microbes. But I know it's important for me to keep talking to him and keep passing him the information on so that we can break that cycle of, I think it's because they've just thought that way for a long time, and we need to bring them back to a more environmentally friendly kind of environment rather than a disease, because I think they see disease, but they don't see how the microbes are an environment and an
Right.
ecosystem. And that's the difference, really.
Right. Right. Carol, this has been so amazing. Is there anything else that I've not
Great.
asked you that you feel like you want to make sure that pet parents take away from this?
No, I think love your microbes. I mean, get involved. It's such an interesting and important place we're at now. And though it may seem like big terms, antibiotic resistance, it's actually very logical. So don't be afraid of it.
I love that.
Get
Thank you.
involved.
I love that. And before I let you go, I want to ask you a question I ask all of my guests. And that is, what have your dogs or dogs that you've worked with generally taught you about what it means to be human?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question, isn't it? Um, I've had so many dogs. They've all been incredibly important. I think there's just a synergy between a human and a dog. Maybe we're not human without a dog. Maybe that's it. Maybe we're only human when we have a dog. And actually, maybe half a dozen horses as well.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you, Carol, so much. This has been so great. I will leave all of your contact information in the show notes. So if people want to learn more about getting a test and more about the research that you're doing, they can access it from there. But
Yeah, brilliant.
thank you
No,
for your time, your generosity of spirit, everything. This has just been so wonderful and so helpful.
no, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for listening to this conversation with Dr. Carol Hughes. Honestly, Carol is phenomenal, isn't she? What was your biggest takeaway? And what questions do you still have about your dog's microbiome and its link to their health? Let me know in the comments or DM me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, or contact me through my website, mysticdogmama.com. It's such a fascinating and ever-evolving topic, so I'll definitely be addressing it further in future episodes. So let me know what you want to know more about. And if you'd like to reach out to Carol or you'd like to learn more about how to order a microbiome test and report for your dog, visit her website, biome4pets.com. And that's biome, the number 4, pets.com. But I've left that link in the show notes. If you are enjoying the podcast and haven't done so already, I would be so grateful if you would consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. This really helps me to know what you're enjoying, and it also helps other Mystic Dog Mamas who are looking for help and support to find the podcast and this beautiful community that we're creating together. All right, thank you, and until next time.